All right. It's so quiet here at this hour. I feel strange breaking the silence around me. It's so quiet here at this hour. I feel strange. But, I guess I'll have to talk if I'm going to stream. So, good morning, good evening, and all that to everybody out there. Ah, Kirito-kun. Hi. Oh. All right. Let's get in gear then, shall we? Hi, Alex. Hi, Pizza Racer. Yeah, it's just 6 a.m. here. There's just a few birds singing, and their voices are so much nicer than mine. Hi, Kirito-kun. You like winning. Beautiful. Just close that one. Go to this one here. There you go. Alex has got the link for you. And here we go. The links for anybody in YouTube can be found here via this. Hi, Bob. I'm going to post the links in one or two other places real quick as we get started here. It's 2 a.m. for Harold? Whew. Ouch. Ouch. That's an inconvenient time. Hi, Richie. Thank you. I did. How are you doing? right, post it over there. And it says Sunday, June 22nd. I guess I should fix the date in MooBot real quick. July 13th. Some Spassky games. Nice. Hey, Landon. Okay, let me grab this. Go post it in the dojo. Do. Oops, got the wrong thing somehow. A new mouse, huh? Oh, that can be a bit helpful. So I've got the links there to send out on Dojo. Anything else I should say? Oh, yeah. Link to the commentary. Let's do it. And I see one little typo left in this play command somehow. So let's see if we can fix that. All right. That should be all correct now. And I've put out all the announcements I can and all that. So let's get to it. See, copy link. All right, under 1300, we got Kiri and Campbell. Hey, Yellow, how are you doing today? So far? Yeah, I'm getting there. I don't normally enjoy the first minute or two as I wake up in a day, but the birds sound pleasant, so I'm coming around. My mood's not bad or anything. It just takes me a moment to adjust to being awake. All right, Yellow's first time playing in one of these Dojo Rapids. bear in mind, everybody, that with these arena formats, there's no specific round times to the tournament. So you could play games like back to back to back, or you can take breaks between your games. You can play a game and it won't automatically start another game for you. You could play a game, then you could chat, or you could watch the commentary, or you could go read a book for 20 minutes, or you could take a walk, get a snack, and then come back and play your next game. So you can pace yourselves. It's very, very free in that sense. Some people try to win the tournaments. Other people just try to play, a game or two and enjoy that game. So lots of room around that to set the pace that you want. And Richie, I don't want to dwell on it, but do you remember what we were talking about last time you played? And you had a game that you had played that you were upset about here. And after the tournament was over, I went and looked up the game and checked on it. Yeah. And have you reviewed that game at any point yourself and revised your opinion about your opponent from that game? Or do you want me to tell you what I saw when I reviewed that game? So, okay. I don't want to torture you or anything like that. My goal is only to hey, Far Eastern. My goal is only to help you. And even before wanting to help anybody to play chess better, my goal before that is to help everybody with their relationship to chess. And then with the rest of the chess community, right? So, even more than I want you to get better at chess, I want you to get better at being happy when you play chess. And I want you to get better at, enjoying each other, right? Being a nice, happy-ish, positive community together, right? So we're not going to beat a dead horse, but you thought that your opponent might have cheated against you because they were hundreds they were some hundreds of points lower rated than you, and they beat you, fairly convincingly with black, and you never had a chance in the game. That was sort of your first narrative of the game at the time, right? And I looked at the game, and you had queen on b3, bishop on c4. And around move 9 in the game, you allowed your opponent to play knight a5. And then just take your bishop on c4 after chasing your queen back to c2 or something like that. And so you were down a piece after 9 moves. That's a different game? That's not the one you were venting about? Okay. I'm sorry then. Different game. Okay. Oh. Well, then I have not seen the important game in question. So the game I saw was probably just the game once you were upset from the previous game, huh? Okay. We don't. Then I haven't seen the game that I should have looked at. Sorry. Hey Vrom, I am not going to play in the arena. No. I am going to be commenting on the games that I see in the arenas. Yeah. We all have our own roles. Mine is to watch. Well, Richie, I'm sorry if I failed to find the right game that day. I'm probably even less likely to dig it up correctly today and check it for you. I tried to do you a service, but failed, at least. Gotcha. It's been raining a little bit the last couple days here, which is really nice. When I was living in northern France and it was super cold, I didn't enjoy rain. I wished it wouldn't rain. And when I am somewhere really warm right now, I really appreciate rain. Okay, yeah, well, I mean, it was just a situation where your opponent had this knight a5 threat and you needed to rearrange, the queen and bishop before castling, and it's really lame with white sometimes to have to take a step back. In my white games, when I need to take a step back early in the game, I often try to find some way not to do it. Like I try to force myself to find some variation that allows me to keep developing or going forward or something like that, And so to think like, oh, they're black and I'm not allowed to castle because they have a threat, it's just, there's something about it that can rankle us and we refuse to accept it and we invent some kind of variation that justifies continuing to, develop and use our time going forward. But sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes we just have to step back. So I don't think that's going to be that useful for you since you were just on tilt during that game. But anyway, that was the pattern of that game, and I've had a version of that pattern even in classical games myself. So I don't know. I'll mention it since you invite it. All right. Pizza Racer was once accused of cheating in a classical game and stopped playing for a couple months afterwards. It was so upsetting to be accused. Yeah. But yeah, the grass getting greener when it rains is so nice. So nice. And here it moderates the heat for you. And it can even be refreshing to just go walking in the rain. Yeah. Left a rook hanging for 5 straight moves in the last game. So, Mauve, would I be correct in imagining that your opponent must have cooperated with you on that, leaving the rook hanging for 5 straight moves? Because the way I see it, if they captured the rook, it wouldn't have been hanging on the next move. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's a good question, Man of Squares. Perfectly good question. 6 months? Oh, sorry. I guess you've got maybe 5 months. Let me count to be sure. When in December is your tournament? You've got 1 month to August 15th, September 15th, October, November, December. You've probably got like 5 months or so to get ready. That's a good chunk of time. It's enough time, honestly, to work a bit on a bunch of things. Man, I normally focus on about one thing per month, Man of Squares. If I'm, if I've got, let's say, 1 or 2 hours a day, like I think is a normal amount of time. If I've got 1 or 2 hours a day, I normally focus on one area per month. when I was training really, really like hard and serious, when I was training like 8 to 10 hours a day, then I would work on a couple more things at a time, right? Oh, Sanyal. That's great to hear, and it's also always fun to learn some different things about dojoers. So now I know that Sanyal has a stressful job. Just something I didn't know. There's some of us who have, really tough lives and really easy lives and everything in between. So Sanyal, you work a really tight work schedule, huh? You're a hard-working, stressed. Your cup of stress is full. You must be kind of like a high achiever, huh? I mean, I noticed you're very good at chess as well. And, yeah. Yeah, and as George says, everybody has to find their own pace, right? George Hornsby feels like switching up after 1 or 2 weeks. And we definitely have to listen to our own, bodies or minds or whatever, right? You have to listen to the patterns of yourself, what works for you, as you figure out how to spend your training time and all that. Let me just make a quick announcement. I'm going to keep going on your question, Man of Squares, in just a second here. But I'm just going to make a quick announcement for anyone who's just joined us. We've got rapid tournaments here. Feel free to join and play 1 or more games. The links for people on Twitch are right there. And there's 3 groups by rating. I'm going to try and copy and paste the links over to YouTube if I can, to help anyone over on YouTube find their way there. Vikram, you want to quit chess over one stupid decision? Okay. If that works for you, you can go for it. I would say quitting chess may often be better than just torturing yourself about chess, so. Playing chess in bed, yeah. It's been done by many. It sounds like you need a certain dose of relaxation in your life, Sanyal. So you can probably go back and forth between the chair and the bed, Don't kill your back, don't do it all the time. But you do need to, and you deserve to, lie down occasionally. If you're trying to play a creative chess tournament lying down in bed, that is telling you something about your need to lie down sometimes. Hey, awesome days. I hope you have a great time in your battles. Chess is pretty hard to not come back to because it's awesome. But if somebody's just torturing themselves, a break can be a really good idea. All right, so with that announcement out of the way, I hope some of you will join and enjoy our tournaments. They're starting in 4 or 5 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about a training plan for Man of Squares, who has a first OTB in 5 years. So it feels like, starting over again in a way. Or, there's a lot of rust and, you've forgotten your openings, you've forgotten the Philidor position for your rook and pawn ending, So there's a question of what do you work on over 5 months, right? 12-hour-a-day design work in engineering. 2 hours on the train. That means also 2 hours to get there, right? So 4 hours a day on the train. So 12 hours of work, 4 hours of train. That leaves 8 hours. And out of those 8 hours, Sanyal spends half of them playing chess and only half of them sleeping. Oh my God, Sanyal. You're a warrior of life, my friend. A warrior of life. That's incredible. The first game back can be stressful or nerve-wracking, right? You could have issues. I mean, one important thing you're going to want to do if you've got this OTB in 5 months is you're going to want to play some games.
and you're going to want to set up a real chessboard in front of your computer or next to your computer and play some games with a real chessboard Man of Squares, right? And I would say the sooner you can play one serious classical game online, the sooner you'll start recalibrating to what you need to work on. You see what I mean? When you haven't played for 5 years, one of the things you don't know is what are my current strengths and weaknesses, and what does it feel like to play chess now, and what should be my area of concentration and focus, okay? In my mind, almost any training plan for somebody with 1 or 2 hours of chess per day, almost any training plan should include 3 things: playing some games and looking over them, doing some tactics or calculation or, puzzles of some kind, and then one area of focus, which, as I said, I would normally say you would spend about 4 weeks on, but it depends on the pace and it depends on your personality, how fast or how slow you make progress on the area. Are you working on it 30 minutes a day or an hour and a half a day, right? But I would say a very important thing is you don't want to be doing so many things that you're doing 20, 30 minutes a day on one topic and then switching to another topic and then switching to another topic and not really digesting anything in any one of those topics, Chess keeps you going. I understand that kind of feeling, Sanyal Chess. Yeah. We need kind of like an outlet, a piece of like time, a piece of our life that is ours. And for you, it's that chess, and the streaming is a piece of it for you too. I understand, and that's great. And I hope it goes really well for you. So yeah, it's hard to have a perfect assessment of yourself, but our subconscious still picks up on some things, and it's very important to have that component of like playing a game occasionally that gives us an idea on what we're working on. I do have advice on self-diagnosis, Richie. I have a video on YouTube in which I made a profile of myself while giving people advice on how to make profiles of themselves. All right, the tournaments are starting right now. Far Eastern has a goal, which is a great thing to have when getting into a tournament, folks. Far Eastern has a goal, which is to work on the time management. Okay, so the goal is to pace himself and not end up in serious time trouble. So Man of Squares, you're going to want to play some games. You can find a time to play online, like Friday night fights, or you can join a chess dojo tournament online of the round robin or open variety. Right, Yellow. Nordovik, by the way, you're in the wrong group. There should be a 13 to 1700 group for you. Absolutely. We'll see you back in chat soon, Yellow. Have fun. For everyone who's about to play, you'll want to mute your streams as you play. Yeah, let's get started here. Good luck to everybody. Have fun, most of all. We'll get into the commentary. Man of Squares, I could give you a better answer. Sorry, it's just that the tournament was just starting, and I have to also, make announcements and handle everything else at the same time. It's not the What is Analysis video, Richie. It has a title like, how to make your chess profile or something like that. And it's on the Chess Dojo channel. It's not on my old personal channel. It's something I did more recently. Probably 6 to 12 months ago. I'll give you a better answer, Man of Squares, over time. All right, we'll see you after, Sanyal. Have a great time. And that applies to all our other players and warriors and artists and gamers and sports women and sportsmen. My opinion is that chess is a game and is a sport and is an art and is a science. All of those things at once. So I wish good luck to our artists and sports people and gamers and everybody. So we get an advanced French here between Far Eastern and Jared Hall, and let's maybe follow this game and talk a little bit about tournaments and goals. Even for a little rapid tournament that's not OTB rated, and where some people will drop in and play 2 games and then quit and do something else, right? It's always good to have a goal, when you go into a tournament. It's always good to have a goal. And there's different goals you can have, but I'm not talking about a goal of I want to win my game or I want to win all my games. That's not really an actionable goal. Your goal needs to be a little bit more X's and O's. It needs to be a goal of something you can join whenever, exactly, rats. You can join 2 hours from now and play 1 game and then quit. Or you can join in 1 hour, play a game, pause for 45 minutes, and then play a second game in the 2nd or 3rd hour. You can take any pace you want here. The arena's going to run for 3 hours, and it started about 45 seconds ago. So, yeah, you can play whenever. So, a goal, right? You want a goal that's something that you can work on, something that you can affect, something to keep you focused during the tournament. For example, Far Eastern has a goal to work on time management. Whether Far Eastern has won 2 games or lost 2 games, has a +3 score, a -1 score, an equal score, whether Far Eastern has a good position or a bad position, there's basically no point in this tournament. There's almost no point in this tournament where see if I can post this for Richie. Sorry, Richie. There's almost no point in the tournament where Far Eastern won't be able to work on their goal, right? Where they won't be able to work on questions of, is this an important move or not? How much time should I be spending on this current move? Good position or bad position, right? On the board or in the tournament. This is something that Far Eastern can work on at any point. It's the kind of thing that can keep Far Eastern focused throughout the tournament. It's the kind of thing that can keep Far Eastern from getting as upset if the tournament's going well or badly or whatever, from getting as emotional. Of course, Richie, some of us are just fundamentally emotional people, so it's not going to erase all our emotions to have a goal, right? Nor does an emotional player want to necessarily just delete all their emotions. It's a part of who we are. We have to embrace it and find a way to play well while being emotional, right? But it's great if we're emotional and we've got something to focus on, right? Something to keep us working in the game. This is an interesting spot for white, as Richie points out, because already Far Eastern has to deal with, I'm probably sacrificing / hanging my D pawn. Am I upset about that, or am I okay with that? Right? Well, basically, the point of this line is to be okay with that, but Far Eastern's time usage shows they may or may not have been totally comfortable in advance with the idea that we're sacking this pawn. And Far Eastern retreats and defends the pawn, right? So this is not, that's not the goal of this bishop d3 line. The goal of the bishop d3 line is to just say, go for it, right? Take the pawn while I develop. And you just have to believe, and give the pawn. And then in this position, you can either play rook e1, defending the second pawn, or maybe queen e2 could be a move too. Something like that, right? That's why it's very important not to necessarily have the moves of your opening memorized, but to understand the ideas behind your moves. And when we play bishop d3, blocking the queen's defense of d4, this variation against the advanced French is associated with letting the pawn go and getting a fast development, and generally just being willing to play positions like this one here, down the d pawn. That's kind of critical to this thing. Now, more important even than that, though, is just assessing, did Far Eastern use their time well, right? Did they use their time well? So I see 20 seconds here, 37 seconds here, castles in 7 seconds, so very quick, and then the big think, so to speak, by rapid standards, right? 2 minutes on bishop e2. And 2 minutes is kind of the maximum time that I would say that you spend on a non-tactical, non-game deciding decision in a 15-minute game, right? So I would say it's very good that Far Eastern cut off that think right when they did. That was correct. But what I would say is you're not allowed to then go into another big think on the very next move. And this is where I think Far Eastern sometimes gets in trouble, is that they're thinking often move after move after move without any breaks in the moves. So if you're going to think for 24 seconds or so, in a classical game, that would just be, writing down your move and breathing and taking your time. But in a rapid game, 25 seconds, 37 seconds on the recapture, that's like a normal period of time to think on a move, right? So if you're going to think 20 or 30 seconds on every move, then basically you're not even allowed to stop and have a 2-minute think, right? There's kind of two different ways, generally speaking, that you can pace your time in a chess game. You could take your time and just divide it by the total number of moves you have to play and pace out all your time completely, right? So you could say, I'm going to play a 45-move game in 15 minutes. That's 3 moves per minute. That's 20 seconds per move. Plus there's a 5-second increment. That comes out to 25 seconds per move. And then you always need to add a margin so that you haven't flagged, right? So then we're going to say, okay, that's 22 seconds per move. Something like that, right? And so you pace yourself like that. So you say every move is going to be a 23-second move for me this game. That's one schedule. And if you look at that, you'll see why 24 seconds is not nothing on a move, right? That's 1 second slow. 37 seconds on c takes d4, right? That's like 14, 15 seconds behind the pace that Far Eastern needs to be hitting if he's going for a completely even pace, right? And if he's going for an even pace, that means he's not allowed to stop and have a deep think on bishop e2, which was 2 minutes, 3 minutes on knight c3. Black takes, and Far Eastern's thinking again, right? Again into a tank, right? Now, if you want to have deeper thinks on some of your moves, then you need to pick a different pace for the rapid game, right? Then you need to say most of my moves I'm playing on instinct in about 5 seconds. And I'm going to conserve, I'm going to say that about 12 or 13 of my 15 minutes get to be assigned to important moves to think longer on, right? So then what we're saying is, I would say that we're going to have 4 moves that we think about 2 minutes on, and 1 move that we think 4 to 5 minutes on. That's going to be like the real critical moment. That's a time usage pattern that's going to make more sense for a slightly more advanced player who has an idea when the critical moments are, and who's able to sort of predict the key response for their opponent when they get to a critical moment, right? So if you reach a moment that's really important, you're able to calculate a 2 or 3 move variation accurately, right? And this is probably starting to happen between 1200 and 1600 for most players. That's when you could consider a more uneven time usage graph, right? So that's going to look like 4 moves that you spend 2 minutes on. They're sort of like interesting moves, somewhat important, maybe picking a plan for the middle game, maybe like adjusting to a surprise in the opening, maybe deciding whether to trade into an end game. You've got 4 kind of decisions that you get 2 minutes on, and you've got 1 decision where you get to really calculate. 4 to 5 minutes, calculate some variations. Am I winning? Am I losing? In some tactical sequences, right? That's going to take up, about 13 of your 15 minutes, and the rest of your moves need to be about 5 seconds per move. And that's another pattern. And so those other moves, the 5 seconds per moves, have to just be instinct. Has to just be like, the knight's here, I trade it, right? Queen takes, I do or don't want a queen trade. I move my queen or I leave my queen, right? Knight takes, I develop my bishop, right? It just has to be sort of instinct moves. What you can't do, completely impossible and unsustainable in a rapid game, is to spend 1 minute on every move, or 2 minutes on every move, right? Because basically, we're 12 minutes into this game. Far Eastern played the first 5 moves basically instantly, right? Up through here, advanced French, known position, and then they started thinking for 24 seconds here. So at that pace, you get to move 12, and Far Eastern's used more than half of their time, right? So at this pace, you would expect Far Eastern to be able to play approximately an 18 to 20 move game with the pace at which they're playing, right? And then once they get to move 20, they're basically playing a bullet game. Does that make sense? So we can see the pace is completely off. And I'm basically just going to talk about the pace more than the position here, because that's Far Eastern's goal. That's what's interesting to Far Eastern when they come back and look at the game. And it's a perfectly interesting thing for all the rest of us to consider and talk about as well, right? So let's do it. Now, let's talk about the impact of playing bullet towards the end of the game. Or not towards the end of the game. Starting from the beginning of the game almost, right? Starting from move 20, right? We're sort of at the end of the opening, beginning of the middle game around move 15. So already fairly early in the middle game, we're going to be playing bullet and our opponent's going to be playing rapid chess. It's a huge discrepancy. How important are the things we're worrying about in these first 10, 12 moves, right? These are basically maximum 1 pawn level decisions, right? Far Eastern might come out of this opening down a pawn. By the way, notice White's position is still okay. Far Eastern didn't feel confident. They hesitated on these moves. They were probably feeling like their position was bad. Otherwise, why think this long about what you're doing, right? So, no matter how badly things have gone, so to speak, for Far Eastern, the position is actually playable. Worst case scenario, White might be down a pawn for nothing. Actually, in this position, it looks like White has totally normal compensation for the pawn, right? They moved the bishop back and forth while dropping the pawn, but Black played, queen b6, queen c7, and took the pawn, and then retreated the knight. So, despite some hesitations from Far Eastern, right, the position they have is totally normal for this opening. So all that hesitation was actually sort of semi-unnecessary hesitation. And it would be nice to have time on the clock now. Right? At this point in the game, Far Eastern should probably have about 10 minutes with 5 minutes used. Instead, they've got 5 minutes with 10 minutes used. Let's say they'd gone for an even pace on the 15 minutes. Yeah, that's what I would have them at. If they were just doing 23, 24 seconds per move, they'd be right here at 5 minutes and 10 seconds on the clock, right around here. So knight b5, headed to d6, perfectly reasonable. This, by the way, is an interesting position. I'm not going to go in depth on it, but I'm just going to say in this position, Far Eastern could look at let's say at least 2 or 3 really interesting candidate moves. One is knight to b5 as played. The other is rook c1, just developing another piece, not doing anything concrete just yet, right? And the third option is knight d4, queen g4, bringing the queen over to the king side with a double attack. So this is tactically relevant. This move might just be literally great for White, right? But even if it weren't literally great for White, there's sort of 3 kind of ideas here, right? We could go knight b5, looking at d6, looking at opening up the bishop on b2, right? By maybe dropping that knight into d6. We could go simple move, just saying we don't need to move any piece twice just yet. We bring out one more piece, increasing pressure. And next move, we look at more ambitious things. Or we could do this idea where you bring your queen over to the king side, which is the area that you want to put pressure on, right? So very interesting position, very interesting options. Normally you'd want to have 24 seconds per move to just say, what are my 2 or 3 options? What am I feeling like? Do I feel like bringing out the rook? Do I feel like bringing the queen towards the king side? Or is this the moment to look at a move like knight b5 or knight d5? queen b8, rook c1, a6, and now the knight needs to just take the plunge. See how Far Eastern does here. It is good. Far Eastern sped up a tiny bit. You see that they're going to potentially make it past move 20 before they get under a minute. A couple moves ago, they were behind that pace, but they had one move that got played in 12 seconds there, which was the recapture on f3. And bishop d3 was played in 30 seconds instead of a minute, but still, it's still dragging quite a bit. So, Far Eastern, right? If you want to spend time on every move, your pace is going to have to be more like 24 seconds per move instead of about a minute per move. And if you want to think for a minute or two on a bunch of moves, then some of the other moves need to get down to 5 seconds. You got to really just, I mean, you can't play a recapture in 12 seconds, you know? You just have to be like right in there, you know, either pre-moving it or with your hand over the board so that you can execute the move in, you know, 2 seconds or something to save time for the moves you want to think on a couple minutes. And a lot of these moves like have to become some instinct moves, right? And yes, as Arsenal fan Richie says, White has managed to get an initiative. This would be the consistent move. Check. Opening up the position, right? If Black tries to defend the g7 pawn here, one option is to take this pawn. Another option is to go queen h5 check. If Black tries to defend that pawn by castling, right, then White can probably do this really famous combination. Oh my God. I think this actually might work in this position. That's insane. Folks know this combination? The famous 2 bishop sacrifice. This is like absolutely sick here, how this seems to work. You're threatening checkmate. There's this move e5, and now queen h6 and rook g3. I wanted folks to do this, to do the double rook lift, and do something different, where you go rook h3, right? But, I mean, technically, if you do everything with check, it's lower risk that you might have blundered something, right? Lower risk that you get anything wrong. If you always keep your opponent in check, there's less candidate moves that you could have missed, right? But yeah, this combination comes from Lasker, right? Emmanuel Lasker versus Bauer. I'm not sure Bauer's first name, but Lasker Bauer, a bird opening. And me personally, I want the aesthetics of this doubled rooks. So we're going to go sack one of the rooks on h3. So I'm going to do it, even though I shouldn't. Okay. Delicious. We're not going to get too deep into long analysis of a bunch of variations, but that's just to give us the feel of we've opened everything up. It was Emmanuel, the actual world champion, the future world champion. Or was he already world champion? He became champion in like 1895, and the game might have been 1896. This is just to show us the feel that we want to get. Knight d6. That's this advanced French feeling. It's to eventually open up the pieces to go after this. Or my mistake, Richie. You know, we don't know for sure which one of us is wrong. One of us is wrong, though. One of us has made a mistake, which is fine. It doesn't really matter which year or which player as long as we remember a theme, right? The thing that's working is we each know the idea of blowing it up. Thanks, Hockey Chess Dude. I love it too. Here's another piece I've got that he hasn't put up yet. I don't know if I have this right. Got a bunch more work here. Yeah. He does all kinds of great stuff. I love it. It's all around the room too. I can't really show it so easily, I don't think, but like there's like every wall has got work on it. He's kind of playing at making an art gallery, and room here. Okay, so knight d4 was played. Let's see how far Eastern got in this game before getting down to 1 minute. They're better at drawing than me too, Pizza Racer. So yeah, no shame in admitting it. There's a recapture in 3 seconds. So Far Eastern's capable of playing a recapture quickly. Made it past move 20 with a minute on the clock. That's good. And now the black king can't castle. That's really good. Queen b5 check. Whew. Far Eastern had enough time left to still see these moves up to here. A minute left. Far Eastern's on the attack. I think White has a forced win in this position probably right here after king d8 with the move bishop d4 headed to b6. We'll see what Far Eastern comes up with. Having a couple minutes on the clock would be bad. Oh no, rook c7. This is where you need a little more time, right? Bishop e5 looks attractive as well, but black does maybe have bishop d6. Not completely losing, I'm not sure. Oh no, it is completely losing. Arsenal Ritchie's right. Okay, check this out. I'll show this move for a second. So check here, bishop e5, trying to force rook c7. Yeah, Knight King's Indian Defense and Arsenal fan Ritchie are right. This is lights out. Because the only way to stop rook c7 is this move, right? And then you take, check. The king's actually forced, right? This square here is taken by the queen. The king is forced to go to the back rank and sack both rooks. And we could look for a checkmate, or we could take 2 rooks, right? And then mop up. So you guys are right. Bishop e5 was a crushing move. I'm pretty certain that bishop d4 to b6 is also a crushing move here when you've got the king cut off like so. But the rook dies, and that's it. So, I mean, we have to assess for Far Eastern's purposes, right? Is rook c7 a time trouble mistake or a calculation mistake, right? Is this the level of mistake that Far Eastern should expect, or would more time have meant, a better chance of finding, of seeing that c7 was covered and a chance of finding a different move instead, right? And my thought is that if Far Eastern had a few minutes on the clock at this point and spent, 2 minutes on this move instead of on one of the earlier moves, that Far Eastern could see that rook c7, queen c7 is not going to work, and could, find some other option. I'll also say White's not forced to find a knockout to get a decent game here, right? Like, Far Eastern doesn't need to calculate a winning variation to get a good position here. They could simply say, I don't see a win, my bishop's attacked, and retreat the bishop to any square. And whether or not they've seen a forced win coming, you're gonna have a very playable game as White here, right? Like, it's still an interesting game, but really, a blunder of that kind is going to suck all your chances out of the game, right? So to me, Far Eastern played consistently too slowly in terms of how they allocated the time in this game here. Yeah. So Far Eastern, I basically talked only about time usage while watching your game instead of about the board, since I knew that you had a goal, and I thought it was a great example for everybody else to learn about focusing on a goal. So my commentary doesn't talk too much about the X's and O's, about whether or not you should sack a pawn or not. It talks about more about, like, should you have spent time thinking about whether or not to sack a pawn, regardless of whether the decision is right, And I don't talk a lot about, is your position better or worse, but more about how is your clock keeping up with the move that you're at or not. So you can review it and see what I thought. And I offer you 2 different methods in the commentary for how to parse out your time. Okay? So I give you 2 different models for how you can spend your time during your games, and you can think about if one of those 2 is going to work for you and then try and stick to it when you get a chance to review that game. Heck, it might be worth 200 rating points or more just to pick one of those 2 things I mentioned and then force yourself to stick with it for a few games. All right. So, round 1 is wrapping up for a lot of people. I'm going to do what I normally do, which is I'm going to rotate through the sections. So we just saw a game from the under 1300 section, and now we're going to go to the 13 to 1700 section. And we're going to watch basically a second round game for somebody in the 13 to 1700 group. All right. So let's see what we've got here. Probably a lot of people waiting for their next game to start. Oh, no. We got some games here. We got Marky against the Professor of Prophylaxis. We've got George Hornsby towards the end of a game against F. Soba. Let's see if Baymon and Nugthaz. Oh, that's also a first game. Still winding down. You're super welcome, Far Eastern. See about Prophylaxis. Uh-oh. 1 second, folks. Whew. Ay, ay, ay. The dogs went crazy too? Wild. At least I put an interesting position up right before I had to run out, huh? So this is Marky against Prophylaxis. You see these players have budgeted 2 minutes or so for perhaps the end game if Queen e5 gets played, or maybe the middle game will just keep right on going. As white, I don't really want to let black's bishop out because it'll also let black put the bishop on e6 at some point. I think so. I'm tempted to play g4 just to really lock that bishop out, even though it ruins my own king position and I'd be nervous about it. There's also the move rook e5 was possible. The point being, if bishop f5, you could take it, overworking this queen. But rook e5, you're also committing your queen to defending the rook, right? So what if black plays rook d7? You have to double check that you can come through these tactics as well. Yeah, maybe rook e5 was possible instead of g4. Hard to say. g4 played. Queen d6 from black. That's going to force an endgame, right? And we're not allowing queen g3 check here, are we? Marky's thinking a bit about this, but that's forced, man. Prophylaxis just basically double attacked your king and your queen. So you're gonna have to trade the queens, Marky. No real choices there. The good news for you is the endgame position is pretty fine for white. All right, king f2, bringing the king towards the weakness. So now black can keep white's rook out, so it can't attack this weakness. Had white gone rook e5, the move that white might have worried about, and that I might have worried about, would be this one, going after here. And then you get into some situation like this. Maybe king here. No, then you could go bishop takes rook, bishop takes b5. So like here and here. And this is what white has to calculate. Prophylaxis. But this is what you have to consider as white. King f2, the black rook's going to be able to go to c6 and then c3. So there'll be some counterplay. But black can also start with king f6 to keep the white rook out. Black tries to fight against white's pawn chain, but the pawn chain's pretty solid. Wrong direction for Marky's king. There's nothing happening over here. I know black just played this move, but there's nothing happening over here. We need to go after the opponent's weaknesses. Rook e5 or rook e7, trying to go to c7. It doesn't work because of rook c6, but oh, actually, you could go here. And then if here, you have this move. Woo! And bishop d5 check actually works. So that's going to allow your rook to go here, cover your weaknesses, harass their bishop. That would have been a pretty decent move too. Okay. It's nice that you want to use the king in the endgame, but that king is doing nothing. The only thing for this king to potentially do is to be in range of c2. That's the only thing that you can do with this king, is defend that weakness. Anything else is just moving the king around in circles. Now I would rush the king over to this pawn, but I mean, black has not moved the rook to the c file, so I don't know if white realized that it could be coming. King f6 is a good improving move for the black king, covering a couple weaknesses from white's rook. King d2, all right. Good job, Marky. All right. The professor offers the rook trade. Implication, if you move away, this rook might go in. Depends where you move away to. Trade. Tradeovich. Fair enough. This position should be drawn, even if black doesn't capture and lets white take on d4. The position's completely drawn because everything is blocked and the pawns can't move. But if you take, you let the white king take and come to d4. Then there's a little pressure on black. So actually the safest defense here for black is to just ignore that pawn. Just play f6, king d6, Let that pawn sit on c3 or d4. We don't care. But if black wants to win, they might be thinking of checking and going bishop g2. That would be wild. We don't have time to figure out if that would have been winning or losing because it's a rapid game. But it was possible. To my understanding, the bishops should just move around in circles now. All right. So the story of what we've just seen, I favored white at first. We had this position with the double D pawns for black. With queens or without queens, right? This position here with the doubled pawns. I favored white over black. Why? Not because of the doubled pawns. In fact, in the endgame, the doubled pawns meant that black always had rook c6 or rook c7 with great counterplay against c2 and rook c3 to a3, right? Which black didn't quite make use of soon enough. But I favored white because of control of the e-file. At first, that was the most important factor in the position. Black has plenty of counterplay for the doubled pawns along the c-file. But because white has the e-file, white could have been first to go into e5 or e7, some weak dark squares, and attack the pawns on f7 and d5, right? So initially, I favored white, had some chances to make use of the e-file. But when white didn't pounce on those chances, black stabilized the position, and it became equal. There were one or two moments where black could have maybe tried to take over the endgame with rook c7 or rook c6, and then coming into c3. But it was always pretty complicated and concrete. You'd have to calculate a little bit because you're always letting white play bishop takes d5 with their own play. All right, so interesting game, but now let's grab a full game, shall we? In this 13 to 7. We've got 18 players just in the 13 to 1700 group. Holy moly. Okay, most of these people should be on their second games now. Let's check out Baymon and Anonymous, maybe? Is this early in a game? Yeah, early in a game. All right, and we've got an interesting situation. 2 pawn sacrifice from Baymon. Wait, no, Baymon's got a piece. No, I'm going to pick a different game. Sorry. White's got an extra bishop here. So that is super rough for black. Baymon basically has won the game in the opening. Now, you could always mess it up and have to win the game again in the middle game or lose the game in the middle game, right? But we can at least say that you won the game in the opening, even if you have to try and win it again later. All right, this is early times in this game here. So we got a Sicilian. E6 Sicilian with white playing what's called a Marazzi bind, c4 and e4. The point of this opening is to make it hard or impossible for black to play d5 in the center. So let's bear in mind what the point of our openings are when we play them, right, folks? Let's bear in mind. Yeah. Many Sicilian players will have a lot of experience with the bind. Most of them won't love it. Here Segulu plays an odd move, f3, kind of super protecting the e-pawn, right? In a sense, that's a more secure protection for the pawn than knight c3. Normally one plays knight c3 first because it not only defends the pawn, but it defends the key square on d5, right? When you play f3 in response to knight f6, which attack 2 squares, you only defend one of them. Usually that means black has ascendancy over d5 and can just break in the center with d5. And the bind will completely fall apart if you allow black to play d5 in the first 6 to 10 moves of a game, right? Then You've wasted time on c4. You've wasted time on f3. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to waste my time. I don't like to be 7 moves into a game and 2 or 3 of the moves I've played are already irrelevant. Generally, I hate having even one of my moves be irrelevant by move 7. You know, I try to be very careful about not wasting my time. Let's see if George Hornsby gives white the d5 treatment. I expect George will. I think George has the experience in class. No, we get a developing move, which on its own looks good, but it's not d5. Knight takes c6. Yeah, I mean, the real question is, what did Hornsby have in mind against the more obvious developing move, right? Holding the space. Because now as black, you have to worry about moves like knight b5, knight c6, and knight takes e6. Tactical moves, right? Hey, Kirito, everybody has the right to use their time, so just try to stay focused on your game. Don't come in here talking to us during your games, you know? Just focus, my friend. Find something you can enjoy about your position or some lovely thought in your own head and stay with it. All right? And we would love to talk with you between games if you want to take a break. But during your games, we are not here. All right, see you after that, Putsy. Have a nice story time. Okay, so I'm curious what Hornsby had in mind against bishop e3. There's potentially queen b6 or queen a5. Maybe queen b6 is good. High energy game, Paul. Nice. Maybe the idea is just queen b6. That gets out of the range of the knight, and it threatens to really bust white on this diagonal. And if this move is crushing, then we got to give George full marks for bishop c5, you know. And I don't want to wrongly malign George for not playing the good move d5 if the bishop c5 move is just as good. I mean, the move f3 weakens this diagonal. If George can prevent white from castling and boot this knight from the center, then, you know, maybe d5 will be even better in a move or two. So let me just check so I can give George a proper mark here. Queen b6. If knight takes knight, you could go here to collapse the opponent's dark squares, right? Knight's hanging and nearly trapped. It could go here. And queen a5 wins the knight. Queen b2 might be good. Bishop f2 might be good. But yeah, that looks crushing. Knight c2, you can take. All right, George, good on you. Minute spent, minute well spent. George found a killer move here in bishop c5. That's beautiful. Another thing that, by the way, you know, white would have been much safer playing knight c3 instead of f3, right? f3 is kind of a weakening move as well as strengthening move. Here against bishop c5, the diagonal's not open. You could go knight b5, you could trade, you could play bishop e3, and after queen b6, this point's better defended. So an option like knight b5 or knight c2 is much more playable. So yeah, this f3 move really hurt Segolu this game here. Really hurt. And it's a normal move, but it's out of order. Knight takes c6 played, b takes c6, knight c3, castles. d5 is on the menu, but d5 is basically going to be a pawn sack to rip open the center with white's king unable to castle. So as George here, you want to focus on not letting white castle, but you also want to play any useful developing moves you can before you commit to the d5 pawn sack, probably. So white castles, so he castles. The key move to have considered is knight a4 for white, right? That's what black needs a plan against. Head of dog, my swim training is going great. Of course, I'm not planning to swim in the disgusting San Francisco Bay, but I have been attending the Masters swimming training here. I don't even know if I'm saying what it is right, but I've been going, they have practices, so to speak, on Tuesday and Thursday, or workouts on Tuesday and Thursday. And I've been going every Tuesday, Thursday. I think I may have gotten my first case of swimmer's ear, actually. Because last night, my ear started like throbbing and just on one side, and sounds different, sounds weird on that side, kind of muffled, and it's quite painful. So I've been going very regularly, training's going well. I spend a good chunk of the workout. Well, for workouts like 2, 3, 4, 5, I spent a good chunk of the workout just thinking about, should I give up now? Should I give up now? Should I give up now? Maybe now I could give up, but I got to the end each time. And this past week on Tuesday and Thursday, I didn't really think about giving up too much. Would I jump into the bay to save someone from drowning? Of course, head of dog. Of course. I mean, as long as they weren't, the CEO of a multinational corporation or the president of a company or of a country or something like that. I do have a do no harm oath. I'm not a doctor, but I still took an oath to do no harm. So if there was somebody too evil in the San Francisco Bay, I wouldn't jump in. But in general, yeah. If I just, you can't really tell who's in there because they're mostly underwater, I would jump in and haul them out. You must be a good swimmer if you're swimming across the bay next weekend. Good Lord. I won't be able to help you though because I'm in Hawaii. Hopefully you bring a lifeguard with you. Anyway, yeah, the swimming's going great. Sounds like you're swimming too, huh? You must be a much better swimmer than me if you're going to swim across the bay. If it goes really badly, you'll end up all the way over here. Yeah, that would be pretty bad. Although I don't think anyone's ever swum from San Francisco to Hawaii. So if you do it, it'll break ground for mankind. Arch Rose. Swimming's like a super exercise. You should definitely, if you want to learn to swim properly, you should just do it. You got one life. This applies to everyone out there on topics other than swimming as well. If there's something you'd really love to do, do it. Don't just be like, oh, I would love to do it. Like me, for example, I would love to learn some more music. And I'm not just gonna die without learning how to play some more music. I'm gonna do it. Too many things, so you have to choose. Okay, fair enough. I've got that too. I'm not gonna do everything I want to do because there's too many things. All right, Bishop G5, Knight H5, headed to F4. I've never heard of or listened to Sleep Token, but I will. In fact, I'm just gonna open them in a tab over here so I don't forget the name. It's not that I would forget that Hockey Chess Dude gave me a music recommendation to listen to. It's that I would perhaps forget the name. And then I'd be like, oh shoot, what was the name of that band he told me about? Does Knight H5 threaten Knight G3? I would say no, Neko. Oh, but you're right. It sort of does, I guess. Yeah, man. I wouldn't have really thought of that, Neko. Neko says the knight could go to G3 as well as F4 because it traps the rook on H1, and if you take on G3, then Queen G3 check, Queen takes G5, winning a pawn. So I guess weirdly, Knight G3 is a pawn-winning threat, which might mean it's an even bigger threat than Knight F4. Who would have ever thought of or noticed that? Other than Neko Koneko. I'll say this, Arch Rose, swimming's not that hard to learn. I mean, you could learn a single stroke in a day, basically. To swim one stroke properly. It's not like a very high bar compared to some other things that might be on your list, right? Like if you want to learn general relativity or how to play violin concertos by Mozart or something like that, those are things that might take a few years. But learning how to swim properly, that's really like a one day. That's a one-day goal. Queen d2, covering some dark squares. So now this knight g3 move would probably explode in our faces after bishop f4. And knight f4 is also ruled out. So Hornsby has got to find something here. Segolu has not yet succumbed at all to this weak diagonal, right? Hornsby has not landed anything near a knockout yet. I don't know how good this knight h5 move was, but I understand this move felt threatening. I think here I would have allowed bishop f6, though. If I think about it, this is my instinct. Rook here, attacking b2. But then white can play this queen d2 move that they want to play anyway, huh? Yeah, fine. That's what I would do, though. And then I would just explode it all. And basically, I'm allowing bishop f6, wrecking my king, and just counting on my total dark square domination to deal with the fallout, if there is any fallout, right? Like queen here, I can just plop my queen in the center like a big old boss. And my king is snug. Well, I say snug, but maybe I should double check. Yeah, it's okay. It works out. Let's see what Hornsby came up with. h6. Bishop trade incoming. And Segolu should manage to castle this game, which is going to be a huge achievement for white. Huge achievement. Bravo, white. Folks, stop accusing your opponents of cheating. You're not good enough to know whether or not your opponents are cheating. You don't have a big enough sample size, and you don't have a high enough chess level to play over a game and know whether or not someone else was cheating. So just cut it out. Maybe you didn't know this, so I'm letting you know. You don't know if your opponents are cheating. We've got masters who can't tell whether or not their opponents are cheating. You guys can't tell. You have no idea if your opponent's playing top engine moves unless you're using an engine. You're not good enough to know what the top engine move is. I don't know what the top engine move is. So all we're hearing is that you're probably cheating. That's the only thing we're hearing here. And even that, we don't know for sure that you're cheating, so we're not going to emphasize that, right? We're just going to say, everyone should not cheat, and everyone should not, you should all not cheat, and you should all not accuse each other of cheating. You're 1850 ELO playing on your girlfriend's account. So you are cheating, Kirito. So you're complaining about your opponent cheating, but you are cheating. You're not allowed to play on somebody else's account. As an 1850, why would you be playing on a 1200 account in an under 1300 tournament? That's cheating. You're literally Kramnik. Kramnik accused other people of cheating while in fact he was cheating by using other people's accounts. Oh, you're telling me what this guy's saying. Okay, so this guy is cheating, Kiri Tokun. My apologies. Your opponent is cheating. All right. Well, could you in a very, very kind way inform them that it's cheating so they know not to do it in the future? Like, we don't have to be nasty about it, right? It's just, it is cheating and it shouldn't be done, so please don't do it in the future, you know? And this player should withdraw from the tournament and come back on their real account. Why didn't he log into his own account? His girlfriend doesn't want an extra 100 points. Then when she comes on, she's going to have to lose those 100 points. I mean, ugh. So, yeah, just help the dude out, you know? The account joined 5 days ago, so it's unlikely that it's his girlfriend's account. It's just a baloney story he's making up, probably. All right? All right. Sorry, everybody, for this little bit of yuckiness just now. But it's not that we can never talk about this stuff. You know, this is part of it. This is part of chess. And even though it's unpleasant, we have to face it and address it from time to time. Right? No, you're not Kramnik. We take it back big time. We take it back big time. Oh. Okay. But yeah, we don't want to spend all our time dwelling on cheating or even on accusations of cheating. But in general, it is best to never cheat and to not accuse people of cheating because we don't know. We're not good enough to know. When I play on here, I don't even know if my opponents are cheating against me. You know, occasionally I have an inkling, but I don't know for sure. And for those of you who are not cheaters but are worried about cheaters, I will give you a little tip. The best thing you can do is to not worry about whether or not your opponents are cheating. Worrying about it never helps you at all. Yeah, we've got a tournament going on right now. Type in !play on Twitch if you want links to the tournaments, if you want to join us. There's 3 different groups. There's an under 1300, there's the 13 to 1700, and there's a 1700 plus. The arenas go for 3 hours. They go basically every Sunday from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Long ago, indeed, as Charlie says, I was the head cheat detector on chess.com. Not a job I enjoyed doing. But I do know what we're talking about, at least. Neko Koneko correctly pointing out that white could consider giving this bishop here by now. You know? Takes. Come on, let me make a move, please. Now, in this case, there's not much of a follow-up in terms of attacking pieces for white, but black doesn't have many defenders over here. White's got, you know, this central grip, and so there might be time to play f4 and then lift a rook. So it's already conceivable. It's conceivable already. Sigolu getting quite low on time here. Why didn't I enjoy figuring out cheating? Because it's all just nastiness tactics and swindles, right? Like the cheaters are just wasting their time and effort not even playing chess when they could be playing, right? Then they're wasting the times of their opponents who want to play against actual opponents, not against computer engines, right? Then we're wasting our time searching for these people. It's all like a waste industry, you know? It's like, do you know the concept in economics of a waste industry? Like, for example, there was a thing, one example was when at some point they had to install lamps in the daytime in some city because there was so much pollution that they needed to install lights during the daytime to be able to see because the sun was blocked out by all the smog. So when you're building and installing and putting in all those street lights and then running them during the day, from one perspective, it's like a growth in the economy, right? You're building more stuff, manufacturing stuff, paying people to install it, etc., right? Buying more oil, blah, 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 right? But actually all you're doing is repairing like a defect or a loss, right? You're not, there's no actual improvement in life, right? So that's a waste industry. So, you know, and then on top of it, in addition to all my time working on cheat detection being basically a waste, right? In addition to all that time being wasted, it doesn't generate anything positive for anybody, right? On top of that, it's unpleasant because you're spending all your time around two groups of people, cheaters and people who are ultra upset about cheaters. And both of those groups of people are actually not like super pleasant to spend your time dealing with, right? The cheaters are just like mostly hardcore liars, right? They deny cheating. They threaten to sue you for saying that they've cheated, blah, blah, blah. Titled players too. They'd be like, I'm going to sue you for defamation, closing my account for cheating, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, you cheated, you know? Like, we should be suing you for coming into our website and pissing all over the place, right? We made a nice place. We told you could come hang out here. There's lots of lovely stuff. We worked hard on it. You could come enjoy it. But there's a rule that you can't come in and just piss all over the place. And then you came in and you pissed all over the place. You know? All right, white has found a move. Let's see what Segolu went for. G4, announcing hostilities on the king side in another way. And Hornsby's taking some time to process, but there's only one move, knight f6. So Hornsby is just registering the surprise. And then the like really stringent anti-cheating people are usually pretty unpleasant as well, you know? They're always mad at us for not banning enough people fast enough, and they're so mad at the people, and they send in hundreds of games, and they think that everybody cheated in every game, and they're so mad at them, and it's like, I understand that. I understand being mad at the cheaters because I'm wasting my time policing them. But at the same time, you know, the cheaters are just sad people with ego problems. It's not really useful or worth it to get that mad at them. So it was all just a waste, you know, all just a waste. Are you saying you could go knight g3, chat? Ah, that's what's being considered. Knight g3 with the possibility of the game petering out as a draw like this. Two different moves for George, so there is a real reason to be thinking. Thanks, chat, for doing my commentary job for me. Knight g3, as people pointed out, bishop f4, there would be knight e2 check, which would be fine. So if George is not fancying his position at this point, knight g3 would be really logical, trying to bail out with a draw. Hey, chess streamer defeater. Greetings and welcome to the dojo. Playing on someone else's account is not allowed. Is it that bad? I don't know. You know, it's not as bad as anything Trump has ever done. So it's depend to evaluate whether it's that bad is, I don't know, compared to what. But if you really are an 1800 level player, you should play in our 1700 plus section, right? That you'll have more interesting games there. If you're really 1800 and you play in our under 1300 section, then you know your games might not be super well matched. You know what I mean? Attacking on instinct. Let's see what George picked. Knight g3, bishop f4, knight e2. The game goes on. Uh-oh, bishop d6. Yeah, there's no real way to reset that rating. It's true, chess streamer defeater, other than just playing some games. Yeah, come into the 1700 plus group. Your rating will adjust faster, and your games will be more interesting or appropriate, right? It'll just be more fun for everybody. And folks, you don't need to worry about your rating, right? If chess streamer defeater has to take some of your rating points for their rating to level out or steady out properly, that's fine. Don't worry about your rating points. Just worry about, are you having fun games, right? Are you appropriately paired? Are we having a good time here today, you know? It is a funny screen name, Mr. Hockey Chess Dude, yes. I mean, when I see that stream name, and I know we've been saying that, you know, we shouldn't be accusing people of cheating, but I'll tell you from my experience, when I see somebody come into a stream with a name like Chess Streamer Defeater, they're usually about to say, hey, bro, do you think you're good? Let me 1v1 you, bro. I just learned how to play, but I don't think you're that good. And then they'll use a chess computer to defeat the streamer in order to quote-unquote humiliate them. Yeah. That's my association with the username. I watched the Queen's Gambit, and it doesn't look so hard. 1v1 me, bro. All right, A3. Not to insult your name or anything, chess streamer defeater. You might have great reasons for your name, and it's a cool name, and I'm sorry to hit you with my prejudice and all, but, you know, I've lived my life, and that's my experience. All right, so Hornsby struggling here, under 30 seconds on the clock, and down a piece after bishop d6. Miscounting attackers and defenders under time trouble. White grabs a piece, and White's low on time too, so to some extent anything could happen. Tactics and Swindles has a policy of, you know, just if you have a choice, not playing with usernames like Just Resign or You're Weak or so forth, yeah. I did not study psychology, Pablo, no. Have you studied psychology, Pablo? Do you know anything about why people go into streams in order to beat the streamers? What's the attraction of coming into a stream and beating the streamer? There's definitely a fair number of people who like to do that. George has recovered a pawn. Most importantly, they're just both playing off the 5-second increment at this point. So that's going to give everybody chances. We got opposite colored bishops. which means black would love to be able to get control of the dark squares with their pawns to limit white's bishop, and white would want to block out this bishop with some pawns on light squares, but it seems hard to do. Hornsby going for some pressure against the majority of pawns of white, wants to pressure that pawn. White's not moving. And the clock was indeed more important than the board in this game here. Segolu didn't notice how low they were as they decided, should I take or should I defend? And flags. Whew. Are most chess players good in psychology? I think a lot of them are, Pablo. Or at least, have some like basic insight. I'm sure somebody who studied it would know more than a chess player. But a chess player is going to have some insight usually. Yeah. That's reasonable to expect of us. Spend your time locked in battle with both your opponent and yourself. And to get good at chess, you often have to come to terms with, some realities and some truths about yourself. We've got a FIDE Master blessing us with their presence in the tournament. Beautiful. And Rats hoping to get a match with them. Let's see. Schleter currently playing against Vrom. And we're moderately early in this game, so let's have a look at this game. It was a great game, George. We watched the whole thing, by the way, so you'll get to check out the replay later if you want. Segolu did a great job of surviving the opening, right? Because when you got control of that bishop c5 to g1 diagonal, it could have been, a blowout game for black. But Segolu stayed in it and eventually got the advantage when you got low on time. Yeah. Okay, so I've played this system with white. There's a very, very important move here for black that Vrom didn't know. I'm just going to throw this out there for you, Vrom. I'm pretty sure that in this position, you've developed the pieces quickly. But white is setting up with e3 to kind of box out your pieces. And if you give white time with knight e2 and a3 and d4 or b4, white's going to get the advantage. Okay? So right here, I think black's supposed to play d5. Boom. Taking advantage of the slightly slow development of this knight on g1 and some light square weaknesses. d5, explosive, and then if they take, you come here, threatening knight d3, and just simple recapture on d5. Once you take the pawn on d5, it'll expose, some mild weakness for white on the d file. I think you basically have to play this move, d5, if you want to justify this line in this move order. I could be wrong, but have a look at it and see if I'm right or not. I see Vrom was playing very fast, 14 minutes and 50 seconds, so they must be feeling very comfortable with this position, but here comes Schleter. As we said, d4 with tempo, kicking that piece. h3, g4, limiting that one. Now f4, ready to come to f5. And even though black had all the minor pieces out, they're now showing that they don't have enough of a pawn presence to support all the squares they put their pieces on, That's hilarious, Richie. So what to do with that bishop on g6 now, huh? Ay, ay, ay. Looks like it might be time to sack a piece, which is not great. Oh, I hear those magical Hawaii sounds. So there's two different ways to sack a piece here for black for about 2 pawns, right? You can play h5 or you can play knight takes g4. Yeah? h5 is sacking a piece because when white plays f5, basically this piece is already dead, and as Richie has predicted, my plan is to play hg4 and just leave the bishop there. You can play bishop h7 and delay when you sack a piece, but you're going to end up sacking a piece here probably sooner or later. And maybe allowing white knight g3 makes it worse for you because takes. Now white can play g5 later at their leisure. This looks very bad. Good night, chess streamer defeater. Hope you had fun today and learned something. And we'll see you next time. Yeah, this is really grim. Right, for black right here. So the idea with h5 would be to answer f5 with hg4. I think white would take back versus taking here, but they could do either. But I would expect white to take back like this. And then we're going to take here, right? And then takes and takes. So here, black's 2 pawns for the piece are really crummy, right? They're basically 1 pawn for the piece. But the king side's extra open because we've got the rook here. The other way to sack a piece here is to go knight g4, takes, queen takes. Now you've got 2 healthy pawns for the piece, right? But the rook isn't immediately in the action. So that's kind of like what black has to compare is those 2 positions here mainly. There's knight takes d4 after knight g3 tactics. Yes. I think that's true. Let me see which position that is. I think that's this position here, right? Takes. Takes. You can play here. Yeah. But the position is looking terrible for black anyway, right? I'm very tempted to just give you the queen. You know, like this. But I'm sure it's an overplay. Knight g4, queen d4, some counterplays for black. But that's what I'm tempted to do. If the king went to d8, I probably would do that because I'd have the open d file for this rook. But okay, let's just say like, you know, king f8, and then maybe bishop e3, knight c6. Should I play g5? I'm kind of regretting the rook on f1. Well, I can't find the moves for you fast enough, Tactics and Swindles. I predict this position's super, super good for white. Let's see what Vrom chose. H5. G5. Whoa! White didn't even go for F5 here. They played G5, which means now this bishop will be able to get out if it wants to. Right? Or it's not yet trapped. Maybe white's got a coming up trap that I haven't yet noticed. Even here. Let's see. Oh, man, it does hurt to move this knight away, though, doesn't it? That piece has got nowhere great to go, huh? I would think knight g8, but I see knight h7 just got played. White can play de. Trade the queen. Ay, ay, ay. That's murderous. I didn't see that coming. That works against knight g8 or knight h7. D takes e5. Man, Schleter found this in just a few seconds each move. So that means when Vrom thought a long time about h5, Schleter was thinking a long time about h5 as well on the opponent's time. And this is a beautiful solution with g5. Oh, man. Yeah, Vrom has to castle because can't allow the queen trade, which gets control over this square here. And now knight d5 is a clean, good move, but there's options. Maybe as long as Vrom doesn't get the bishop trapped, the position's playable even down a pawn, right? And black could play the move f6 to try and detonate the kingside area. So Schleter still needs to be careful. Still needs to play real hard here. Richie, you think just trade on d6 and then bring the queen out to a4? That's reasonable. I think throwing in knight d5 makes sense. Oh, but knight d5 maybe d e5, which I didn't calculate. And white will calculate that because it's their game and they have to be careful. If knight b4, now there's queen d1. Probably winning, right? And if we're not taking on b4, what's our knight doing here now, huh? Yeah, that would be a bad move, actually. Just kind of an instinctive blitz move. So maybe queen a4 immediately, Arsenal fan, even without holding on to the pawn. Maybe queen a4 immediately is good. See if black wants to trade the bishop on c3 or go back to c5. Yeah, queen a4 immediately could make sense. There's nothing blatantly wrong with taking on d6 and staying up a pawn. a3 the choice, similar to queen a4, but saying he really wants to play b4 and attack on the queen side as soon as possible. Vrom says, I need that tempo. I can't afford to go bishop c5, get rolled up by the pawns with b4, right? So he trades and then takes back his pawn. Is there not queen d7 and f5 still? What? Oops. Yeah, that move was not possible yet. Here, the move still needed to be f6, I think. That's kind of the move that black needs to play. It ensures you won't trap your bishop. I look small right now. Should I do it like this? Yeah, f6 makes space for the bishop, and looks to open up a file on the king side. But this gives a piece. And, yeah, white's in control. Knight b3, rook b1 doesn't do much, so probably the knight's just going to take the pawn on c4. If black played g6 here to take this pawn with the knight, white could throw in bishop takes c6. It's a really clean winning move for white. So thus we get knight a5. Hey, Shekar. We got 28 players in the 1700 plus group today. Wow. It's good attendance today. People were wanting to play some rapid chess. Oh, did it already work for you? And just... That's great, Far Eastern. Wow. Okay, but Far Eastern, if that's like your focus, and I think it's a reasonable focus and a reasonable goal to keep working on, then basically you need to follow it regardless of the board, right? You almost disregard the board. You watch the clock first. You make the decisions you can within the time management system that you've agreed on in advance, and then you just have to follow it, you know? Hey, Decan, we've got a podcast coming out where Jesse Costi and I discuss it. Yeah, this is what I would have played for white as well, what Schleter just did. Rook e5, c5, gaining space for this rook, taking out the center pawn. So h4, that looked reasonable too, Jem. Yeah, that looked like a fine move. Knight d2. Twisting and turning. Looking to do some funny business. Yeah, 5 minutes left is definitely an improvement. It usually takes time to make improvements because improvements are generally incremental, so you should celebrate the improvement even when you haven't yet reached your target or your goal, Far Eastern. But yeah, keep trying to push towards following a rule on it. Yeah. Yeah, you want to use the hard cap. Yeah. The two basic time usages that I suggested, someone was asking what were the two approaches. Arch Rose asked, yeah, two approaches. So one of them, Arch Rose, was to figure out how much time you have for the game. Then estimate about how many moves a game might take. So this is the under 1300 group. So I said maybe 45 moves is about how many moves you want to be budgeting for. And then you just divide the time. And then you need to hold back, a few seconds so you haven't literally flagged, right? So you budget your time, you divide it by... So we divided out the time, and we came up with that there'd be 25 seconds per move for Far Eastern. And then we just said, let's cap your time usage at 23 seconds instead of 25 seconds. So we're making a little margin so that he hasn't actually flagged, right? The other option was to play most of your moves in 5 seconds or less on instinct, and then take all that time that you've got left and use it on 5 more important moves of the game. 4 moves where you're going to make some kind of like strategic decision about the direction of the game. Like, I want to move my pieces towards the king side or the queen side, or I do or don't want to go into an endgame. You get 4 2-minute thinks, and then you get 1 4 to 5 minute think to calculate some important variations once per game. So four medium thinks and 1 long think. And those were the 2 templates I gave Far Eastern. Obviously, that's not as perfect and responsive as the time usage that professional players are going to use, but it's a decent starting point for someone under who's not a pro. It gets you started. And it's like a simple enough framework, and then you just follow it, right? So he's going to follow the 23-second cap and spread out his time over all his moves, which I think is probably the better choice for Far Eastern, because I think Far Eastern is not very consistently predicting the opponent's moves, right? Spending more time is more useful if you're predicting the opponent's moves and you're calculating a 3 or 4 move sequence that's really important that does actually come up in the game. But if what you're predicting doesn't come up in the game, then it's not as useful to spend more time on some moves. It's better to just have a little bit of time on every move. Uh-oh. We got a blunder here from our FIDE master. Knight e4, hanging a simple little tactico. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah, and it's, because I'm not very good at blitz, I had to make a rudimentary plan for myself, right? So this, I'm not a professional at blitz, so I made a similar plan for myself when I was going to play a blitz match. I gave myself a hard cap on the time I could use for a non-tactical move, right? And then I gave myself a cap on how much time I could spend on a tactical move as well. And I had a certain number of moves per game in mind that I could do those things. And it was very similar to what I gave to Far Eastern just now. Just even more compressed because it was for a 5-minute game instead of a 15-minute game, but it was very, very close. They say making the first move is the most important, Paul. What would be your comment, your response to that famous saying? So now we get an endgame. Rook against knight and pawn. Checked. G5, the knight gets active. Rook G7 maybe? Similar to Rook G7, but cutting out Rook E6 as such a good defense. Knight E6, so if you go Rook takes G6, there's Knight F4 check. King F3 refutes that, however. Will White go for it or not? Hey, pups. Sometimes in chess, you have to see your opponent's idea and then allow it anyway, right? You have to just not believe them. Rook G6, Knight F4, King F3. That's the way. Fair enough, Mauve Steel, right? Well, I think the FIDE Master blundered because they were winning 2 easily awesome days, and they probably relaxed. That's what happens. King F3 first. That looks crushing too, huh? Knight G5 check. No, pushing you back. No. Not that amazing. So here's the full line, folks, for anyone who wants to practice their visualization. Try and follow. Just try and follow it. I'll give you all the moves. Rook takes g6, knight f4 check, attacking the king and rook. King f3, counterattacking their rook. If their rook retreats, you can take the knight. If they go knight g6, you go king takes e4, and you've won a pawn while trading off rooks. Simplifying, very good. So, rook g6, knight f4, king f3, rook e3 check is the tricky line that goes a little bit longer. It's a desperado, right? Sacking the rook for a pawn so that you also get a pawn back. Rook takes rook, knight takes g6. So that's an equal trade so far, which does favor white. But not only that, at the end, white has a killer move, rook e6, which traps the black knight on g6. The only squares the knight can go to are f8 and h8, and they both lose the knight to rook e8 check. So if you can visualize from this position, folks, a black knight on g6 and a white rook on e6, and see that the knight on g6 is trapped, then you have passed you've passed that visualization exercise. Yeah. Right. The point of rook e3 check from black is for white to not have won a pawn in the sequence, right? Oof. Okay. So now it looks like you want to play rook g4 for black. I hear you, Blib Up. I hear you. And when I say visualize, what I mean is you just kind of tell yourself there's a white rook on e6 and there's a black knight on g6. I'm looking at the board. I'm not visualizing it in my head. But I'm just saying there's a rook on e6 and a knight on g6. And the rook's covering e7 and e5. And the knight on g6, what are the squares it can go to, right? h4 has a pawn. f4, there's a white king covering. Rook's covering e5 and e7. If the knight goes to the back rank, that's how rooks move, right? They go to back ranks. They attack things like that. Yeah, Live Up. Lots of people don't realize. I didn't realize Blib Up until I was like 40 or something. And as a kid, like I couldn't draw a picture of like a cat or a dog like other kids could if there wasn't a dog or a cat to look at in the room. And, just all my life, I never put it together. Good luck, Kirito. I wish you luck for all your games. But I also wish your opponent good luck, Good luck to Kirito-kun's 600 rated opponent. White's still struggling to make this one to push black over the edge here. Vikrom's putting up great defense. Now black just needs to trade off one or two more pawns on the queen side, and they'll start to be within range of a draw. Oh, Arsenal fan says white's just got rook f4 now. Rook f4 is a painful move for black and a very good technical move for white. King d3, threatening rook takes d6. Should push the rook back here. Now black wants to go here, so maybe you want to get behind the pawn first. I don't know what Schleter did in 1874. I would guess get born probably, right? And then not much else. Maybe cry to his mama. All right, rook gets behind the pawn, preventing Vrom from playing rook h5. The pawn looks more or less gone. If knight f5, e4, knight g3, that doesn't go anywhere for black. So I think it's going to be rook d5 check and then a last-ditch counterattack against white's pawns here. Knight c4 I would play, yep. Idea being check and then back, and hopefully you collect some of these pawns. Was king d3 easier with the rook still on h1? Would that be this position here? King d3 right here, huh, Putsy? King d3. Yeah, that looked really easy, Putsy. Yeah, if white loses the e-pawn, as Arsenal fan Richie says, if white loses the e-pawn, then we're talking, you know, 100-move slog of a game. Okay, but yeah, this move attacks the knight. Which reduces black's options. They can't go rook d2, d3 like I wanted to because the knight will be hanging. So they have to either go b5 or go rook d2 check, king e1, rook c2. Yeah. Okay, so they take one pawn. And now white wants to get this pawn going. Still pretty tricky. Still pretty tricky, this game. But your king d3 move, that knight check fork is no problem. You take the rook on e4 with your king. You were right about king d3, Putsy. It was a good move there. But also I want to say there was nothing wrong with rook f1. Richie had a good technical move here, suggested rook f4. Rook f4 is really, really killer here. Because it's basically denying this knight c4 move, right? If black retreats, you take the pawn on h4, 3 on 3, it's all good, right? And if they trade, the pawn gets another step further away from the queen side, which increases white's winning chances and very good chances to clean up the h-pawn as well. There's no one rook against two rooks fortress tactics in Swindles. There is none. Jim Inner has a good point. There's a chance that black could try this rook d2, knight e3 tactic. But my guess, Jim, is that the knight's going to be trapped. From my experience with rook against knight. If this knight went to d6, of course, you know, very tough endgame. But here with the knight out here, my guess is it can't quite get away. Right? If knight h5, the technique is here. And otherwise the king starts walking over this way. Yeah. Very unlikely that the knight can get back. But yeah, good tactical awareness to see that knight e3 f1 was maybe possible. Black took here. Let's see if black gets any chances still this game. Now the idea is to play knight d5 and deal with these pawns. Yeah, rook f4 would have been much easier than this. White is down to 20 seconds. Stops knight d5 with the pawn, but black makes a pawn trade over here. And every pawn trade helps black. Now the idea is to get enough counterplay with this a pawn that it restrains white's ability to win the game. Rook f5. On rook e4, there's rook c5, I guess? No, takes that pawn. Well, that's a draw. Rook c4, draw, game over. Wasn't this the point? Rook c5? Didn't that win? You can also play rook c6 here, black. Oh, gives the c-pawn. Why? Does anyone know why we're hanging our stuff? Time trouble makes fools of us all, huh? Time and time trouble. But Vikrom's got 2 minutes. I mean, Vikram shouldn't be hanging the c-pawn here with 2 minutes on the clock. You know, here he could have played rook c4. And here he could have played rook c6. I mean, you got 2 minutes. I'm sorry. You should not just be hanging your c-pawn. No way. No way. Oh, God, the rook gets itself tangled. It gets into close combat with the king. Rooks do not like close combat with kings. Hi, JBS. Oh, man, I think Vikrom's blown it here. Why is he playing his moves in 2 seconds when he's got 2 minutes? Have fun, Blib Up. Ay, ay, ay. Do folks know that rooks like to stay far away from kings properly, so to speak? Properly. White's threatening rook takes c5 and or rook h6 and or rook b1. He maybe tried to flag his opponent instead of playing good moves. The best way, by the way, to flag your opponents is to play good moves. If you're ever in a situation where you've got time on the clock and your opponent doesn't. Generally playing good moves is the best way to flag somebody. Well, rook g4 has been played, Jim. We'll see if we get rook takes c5 from an FM. Unlikely. Well, Rats, you could wait to see when this game is over. Rook a4 check would be horrible here. I mean, rook a2 check would be horrific here as well. You could wait to see when this game ends, and then jump back into the tournament. I can't hide my frustration? Really? I'm just commenting the thing. I'm not wedded to a certain result. They both found some great moves earlier in the game. Checkmate. Coming in. But definitely the final phase with the 2 rooks versus rook and knight was quite error riddled. You know. All right, and quickly into the next game. So Philosopher 8 gets the next game with the FIDE Master. And we are going to turn our attention to the under 1300 group. So. Let's see how many people have eventually joined the under 1300 arena today. 15. Okay, so it's our smaller group. Wow, rook and knight against rook. Very reminiscent of what we saw before. But here's a fresher game. Foulgry versus Kiri Tokun. Yeah, that was very fast, Rats. You had to be on deck to get that game. Yeah, 15 is a good number, Far Eastern. I just noticed that the 1700 plus group had like 28, 29 players, something like that. It was really big. C4 for white possibly here. Bishop takes C4, Queen A4 check. An amazing opportunity. White's obviously really bothered by this bishop, right? So they want to get it off that diagonal. Yeah, I don't know, Far Eastern. It's a good turnout this week. So that's nice. Most people do hate themselves to some extent, Vrom. But it's not awesome to hate yourself. So I hope you can work through some of that hatred. Yeah, we've been talking about what Foulgry wants to do. Foulgry needs to get that bishop out of his face, right? What Black would want to do if Foulgry hadn't blocked the bishop, I think Arsenal fan Richie is right. Queen G5 going after G2 would have been a logical move for Black if White hadn't blocked Black out here with this D3 move. Now I think maybe Black should content themselves with Bishop B4, keeping White from castling, and then castle yourself, right? Whoa! Kirito sends the king to a more open area than I was thinking of. I know when the weather's nice, it's nice to dine outside, but my king's almost always tuck. Sure, Vrom, Richie, and I agree with this sentiment, but Richie from Twitch is saying that he thinks you showed great resilience to get back into the game. And I agree, you were very tenacious with that knight versus rook for a very, very long time. And you even reached a drawing position against a FIDE master from a completely lost endgame is pretty impressive, no? Because that endgame was losing for a long time, but you didn't let him push you over the edge. You slowly clawed back. You did very, very good maneuvers with the rook and knight. You showed great dexterity with them. And tactically, you seized your chances to eliminate White's last pawns. Played a very, very good endgame. All right. All of chat thinks that Triple O looked kind of crazy here. Kirito-kun boldly going where no other king would have chosen to go this time. White goes after the A5 pawn. Of course, the rooks are thirsting to get into the game, right? They're screaming, like, let us in somehow. But this is a very good point to focus on A5 as well. So Bishop C3 on its own makes sense. Now we can see Bishop B7 coming for Kirito-kun. I mean, the position is, you can handle this position, Richie, as Black. You can, yes. You're 2200. And Black has this nice extra bishop. So I understand you feel comfortable that you could still handle the position, but very safe would be a strong way to put it, right? This is definitely risky to castle queenside for Black. So Foulgry starts to prepare the heavy pieces, the catapults. Black being up a piece reduces the risk and improves their position, right? If they didn't have the extra piece, Whew. If black didn't have the extra piece, I think we would really feel the impact of the castling queenside. All right. Here come the heavies. Good lord, Kirito-kun does not care about anything. Lets the rook into b8, and the king just saunters back out. And a rook trade under his belt makes Kirito even happier. Holy moly. Kirito-kun has very high confidence level, huh? Very high confidence. Makes for exciting chess, by the way. Did you guys know that when really confident people play each other, it's more exciting than when really unconfident people play each other? Another way of thinking about it is like optimists versus pessimists. When pessimists play each other, that's when you get more sort of like boring games. And when optimists play each other, that's when it's just like crazy madness. Because they're like, yeah, my king can run through the center. I'll see all the threats coming and I'll dodge them. You know? Like they think their king is an action hero in a movie who can get missed by like 100 rounds from a semi-automatic weapon in a room. You know, just roll under a desk, jump over another desk, still get missed, you know? Oh my god, and opening up the D file. Holy moly. Here's a crazy thing. If white went on the attack this way, going after c7, there'd be queen d1, diffusing white's attack. I mean, I'm not saying I see a win for Falgri or anything like that, right? I understand that Kirito, you know, can save the bishop after lining it up with the king and all that. I see these variations, but it is unusual to see somebody play this confidently as he's playing this game as black, right? Just dodging through everything with the king. Bishop b7 was good. White could play f3 Neko, so it wouldn't have especially ended the game. But yeah, we expected bishop b7, but Kirito said, yeah, rook b8 check, I'll just play king d7. So he just allowed it. Didn't even worry. You know? Didn't even worry about playing bishop b7. Just took the pawn on d4. He thinks he's got God on his side. And accept it all bravely with God on my side. Okay. F3 was not even possible at some point, Neko? There was a moment where black could just checkmate on the diagonal? Why would white not be allowed to play F3? I didn't ever notice a moment where white couldn't play F3 if black threatened the checkmate. All right, let's grab another game, shall we? Got some new games starting up. Chess Dude Johan against 73 Savage 37. Sometime after bishop d4. Oh, but after bishop d4... Was the queen on d4 then? So it wouldn't be a checkmate threat anymore, right? The queen was on d4 then? You think you played a troll game, huh? Okay, so let's see this. Black challenges white center with c6 here. How should white handle it? Maybe, like, one move that springs to mind is bishop c4, trying to keep control over this square. But then black has b5 attacking my piece and maybe even b4. I might lose control of d5 anyway, huh? So what are our options? We could trade off on c6, give up some of our central space, but just be done with, you know, worrying about our pawns hanging, right? But if we go dc6, we're going to want to try to keep black from playing d5. We're going to need to prevent black from playing d5, right? So we could trade. We could play bishop c4, and then we have to calculate some moves like b5, bishop b3, b4. That feels either difficult to calculate, or if you can't calculate it, your instinct needs to tell you to probably reject it. Like if I was not able to calculate it, my instinct would tell me that's probably not going to work. Sometimes you use your calculation to decide, sometimes you have to use your instinct, right? So my instinct would be bishop c4, b5 is not going to be some great position for white. So then I've got this idea of knight d2. I say, we're fighting over the light squares. Let's trade that bishop there and get this knight into the game. And this is the option I would maybe have used in the end. It's like this, 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 this. Howdy, Rita. And then we're going to get this position here. Black gets a nice expansion on the king side. We have to play f3 to not lose this piece. Black's going to develop, and I'm going to play c4. This position is playable for both sides. Typical position. You can get this from a Sveshnikov or a Najdorf if the black pawn's on a6. It's playable for both sides. White's bishop is a little bit better than black's bishop. But it's like well within playable. You can see because of the move h3, this black bishop has plenty of options to go to g5 and h4 and poke at some stuff. And yeah, my guess is black's position is fine and that's nothing special. So given that that's nothing special, I might just have played d takes c6 like Richie was suggesting, you know. And then, I mean, this position's not amazing looking for white because somehow, like, our pieces are a little bottled in here. But, I don't know, maybe it's the best we have. Maybe queen d3 is a little bit better than queen d2, weirdly. Overprotecting e4 a tiny bit. It gets in the way of this piece, but this piece wasn't really coming out anyway. And we want this defended partly in case black plays bishop g6. We need to be able to answer with knight h4 and trade the thing. Yeah. So we go queen d2, bishop g6. You know, then we end up doing something like this. And it feels like black's going to achieve d5 this game. Okay, let's follow the game. So this was a real tough choice. Johan spent a minute and a half on it, or minute 20, which was reasonable. And let's see. Now going for that light squared bishop trade. Okay. Oh, but the knight e4 tactic that Richie was worrying might happen at some point comes in. But it's super complicated because this bishop's also hanging, and this pawn will also be hanging after bishop takes h4. Let's see how white handles it. First, you got to take because your queen's attacked. Now bishop e2 comes in. Now white can play knight f5 or take on e2. They take on e2. Bishop h4. Rook e2 would have been better if white wanted to play this way, by the way. Because in this position here, you're going to take attacking the knight, takes, and then take on d6. And you're better off having your queen here and like this. You know. But we get queen e2, takes. In this position, black could have considered cd5 very strongly, Richie, yeah. But they're just going down their highway. And I don't think that Johan recognized that this pawn on d6 was hanging. From the way they played this with queen e2, not rook e2, and now they don't trade on c6, and they don't take on d6. I think they maybe didn't realize that pawn on d6 was already hanging. And there's a chance that knight f6 now saves the pawn. Obviously, white still has huge pressure on the d6 pawn, a good chance of recovering the pawn that they've lost in the tactics in the next move or two. But there might be a way for black to get out of it, you know. Although I don't really believe that white should not have enough pressure with this rook here and that pawn backwards. You know, even here, maybe we can't. Queen c4 or c6, is something like this put enough pressure? Maybe not. Knight f6 might save black's pawn. But yeah, black plays more normal bishop e7, and now white could take and knight d6, right? And knight f6 is also awkward for this piece. Like maybe after knight f6, white could move the knight somewhere. But black's planning to do this. Somewhere. Very complicated option here. You sack the knight, trade, hitting the queen with the rook, takes, then g3, trapping that bishop. Looks like we're having some issues with the stream, huh? Sorry about that, folks. Oh yeah, my computer's overheated, of course. Sorry about that. We just have to limp along for now. There's no other solution other than me buying a new computer again. c4. Okay, so white's just playing down the pawn here. Retreats. If I were black, I would trade on d5 in a heartbeat to force white to block the pressure on the d file with the pawn. Because I'm aware that my pawn on d6 has been hanging this whole time. If I'm black here, I know my pawn's been hanging, and I want to be up a pawn. I do. When Johan reviews this game, they should hopefully notice that this pawn was hanging for 3 or 4 options, right? Pawn takes, knight d6 was available here. Knight d6 was available 2 moves before. So hopefully when reviewing this game, Johan notices that pawn. Yeah, I hear you, Richie, but this computer was just a dud out of the bag, out of the box. It's nothing about refreshing. Like the thing was always a poorly designed toaster oven. If you run one program on it out of the box, if you run one application, it overheats, and like, you know, you get like the spinning wheel just like trying to draw an arrow or whatever it might be. The thing is just unsavable. Yeah, I suppose I could open a browser on this computer and then just like crack eggs on it and cook my eggs like that. You know, by the time it finishes loading google.com, the egg will be over easy. Well, I don't know if you guys have that word over easy in England. Knight f5 is a very good move, Johan. Very nice. Reapplying pressure to these spots here. It's a MacBook A student. It's a MacBook Pro, super expensive, upgraded RAM, everything. But they just gave me a piece of trash. And I told them something was wrong with this computer, and they said, no, we stand by the product. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing we can fix, nothing we could replace. This is how it is. Just don't run any programs on it. You know, don't open any applications and the computer will be okay. That was the official line. I took it to 3 Apple stores in 3 different countries. All right, here's another chance for Johan to win this pawn. Queen g4, thirsting for mate. But more thematic in this game is just to get that center pawn back. And the way you do it is you trade, revealing the rook's influence, and then you do a little tactico. Takes, boop. And it's a beautiful position for white, Johan. It's a beautiful position you have. Because once you win back that pawn, you know, the remaining black pawns are a little bit split up and weak, and your rooks, once the center is not solid, your rooks are just thriving. You know? Just beautiful. There's also this move here, bishop c5. Here is also very, very playable for white. You'll win back a pawn and have a great position. The problem is, if Savage ever traded on d5, then this center is hopelessly locked. And honestly, now the white rooks are pointless. It changes the game by so much. You know, we're talking about winning or losing a pawn, but it completely changes the feel and shape of the game. With a solid locked center, these rooks are no advantage for white. They're nothing, right? So, you know, black can play rook c8 and white can play rook c1, and it's, you know, nothing special. But the moment that we open up these files, you're going to feel that white is like +1, even though the material's equal. White's going to be at least +1. The rooks are going to be so good. We're going to feel their power. All right, let's see if Savage stopped the checkmate. Yes, indeedy. Notice the d6 is hanging big time here. But Johan's probably first looking at some way to distract the bishop and get checkmate, which is not going to happen. Because white's rooks are pressuring the center, not the king side. Johan's got to read the strength of the position is these rooks, which means you break up the area, you trade, you push, you crack, these kind of moves, right? dc6, c5, f4, those are the thematic moves for white. You know, but if you're looking at the king side, you might come up with a move like h4, or maybe like rook d3, trying to lift the rook. h4, called it, my first suggestion of what you might be thinking of if you're focused in the wrong area. So Pablo, that kind of psychology, I know, right? I can read the minds of chess players. The games are chess.com rated Trident Chess, but they're not OTB rated. Kingside attack is wrong here. That's right, student, yeah. Because white's firepower is here. It's the rooks. And if you count the forces on the king side, this is where black's pieces are huddled around the king. Right? So you're attacking into their badly placed pieces, but if you come and get them, you know, then they'll trade for your pieces when your pieces get there. Look at this d6 pawn. It's just dead. And then the e5 pawn would be weak next. In fact, your best chance of checkmating the king is to get your rooks into the game. Let me show you a variation, A student. Rook d6 hitting the queen. Queen c7. Do you see the variation coming already? Should I not show you any further? Should I let you finish this off? And see why it's so good to use our pieces. Remove the defender. Oh, look at that. We actually have more pieces than the opponent if we use our pieces. Right? So Johan played a great move at some point this game. Rook d1 is a very powerful move. You know, recognizing that these squares are important. But then didn't make use of it, right? So we get this h4 move. This is the move of someone who's like, I should be attacking on the king side, so I'll play a move that looks like a king side attacking move, right? Knight e7. See? We moved our pieces towards the king side. Now they're going to try and trade them. Retreat, ski. Whoa. Oh, Savage forgot for a second that the knight had interfered with the queen and bishop. So there's an extra piece for Johan. But it is for 2 pawns at the moment. So it's still going to be very, very close here. Very, very close game. Piece against 2 pawns is a real battle. If you went to an endgame, the bishop is better at beating 2 pawns than the knight is. And white does have an extra bishop, so that's nice. You could definitely trade queens and try to win the endgame. You don't have to. The middle game is probably even slightly better than the endgame. And so thinks Johan. I fear that Johan still thinks he's going to checkmate the king. And that's why he's keeping the queen. It's close to a toss-up between the endgame and the middle game, but yeah, but this is fine. One of the reasons it's fine is the queen is struggling to defend d6, and she's taking pressure from the rook. You know, so here white's going to be able to play like knight f5 and take, and it's more awkward. The queen doesn't have great squares because of the placement of the white rooks. So it is in my guesstimate slightly better to keep the queen on the board, but not because we've got a savage checkmate against black's king. Really because I want to put pressure against this pawn. I think the queen's pretty nice. I think their queen's a little bit bad. So I'm happy to just keep her on. And there can be some ancillary secondary threats here. You know, with the knight trying to pressure d6, it's going to coordinate well with the queen. Like black will probably have the knight and pawn frozen on g6 and g7. So it'll be nice again. If we can go knight f5, I did not calculate f5, knight f5, queen d7 in advance. There's queen d7, knight h6, but what about queen c8? Oh my god. White took it, and black didn't find queen c8. But what did white have against queen c8? It feels like nothing. I know it seems weird to have nothing, but because white was up a piece with 2 rooks on great squares and black less developed and down a piece. If we'd traded on c6 at any point, I'm guessing that there'd be a way out of all this. But no, there's nothing. Queen c8, knight h6, black can take the knight on h6 because the queen's defended on c8. That's why queen d7 doesn't work. You know? I think I thought like that Richie from the get-go. I was probably about 15, 1600. Hey, Alexandra. ¿Cómo estás? Muchas gracias por el raid. Alexandra Chess. Here, folks, I recommend you to click on this link and follow Alex. She's a good and serious chess player. She goes around to OTB tournaments. She works on her chess. You can find some streams where she's playing at tournaments, etc. She plays classical OTB events. And she's a really nice, friendly, wonderful person. So there you go. There's a link where you can follow. For those of you just joining us and wondering what this is a Chess Dojo Arena Rapid Chess, 3 different rating groups. We run these every Sunday at this time. You're coming in near the end of it. But if you're ever looking to play some serious games online against some pretty tough opposition, then our tournaments could be something useful for you. We've got a classical arena every week and rapid arenas every week. So I didn't really participate in much scholastic chess, Richie. I kind of started at 12 and I didn't, I didn't play endless Italian games with knight f3, knight c3 and stuff like that. But I think it's like personality, and different people play and think differently. So you don't necessarily need to try to play and think the way I do. There's limitations to my strategic way of thinking about stuff. Or my, all my sort of like principles and prejudices and stuff like that. White trades that knight. I'm simplifying a bit. Still, this rook is just dying for d to c6 to be played, right? Like the poor rook. Have you guys ever heard of the idea of like talking to your pieces? Less than 10 seconds. Were you playing OTB Blitz maybe to play the same opponent several times? You were in England, I think, the last time you checked in. OTB Blitz, all right. Yeah, and you don't necessarily want to replace your scope with my scope, So talking to the pieces is something that Jesse also talks about. It might be in Chess for Tigers. It's a concept that's in a bunch of places. And basically, talking to your pieces is kind of the idea of, it's kind of like it's kind of like you're checking in on your pieces. You look and you ask the knight, like, are you on a good square? You ask the rook, how are you feeling, right? If you talk to your pieces, if you pay attention to them, you'll find out that the rook on d1 has been yelling at you for like 15 moves now, right? At first it was like, I'm here, right? It's like, might you consider playing dc6 at some point to give me access? And then at some point it's like, hey, I've been sitting here for 15 moves. What have you been distracted by? How could you not think of me for 15 moves? So yeah, checking in with your pieces, figuring out where they want to be, what they want to do. It's a useful concept. Knight h5. The rook on the e file finally getting some use after bishop f4, ef4. So he's proud. But rook e6 was actually not a good move, despite the pride of the rook. And he's glad to have finally been noticed, right? But if you're going to play knight h5, that's a better tempo on the queen anyway. And then after queen here, instead of rook e6, what would you do? You would go to e7 in one move, right? Or you could go boom, boom, and have both of your rooks well placed and win a pawn. How come nobody wants to win a pawn anymore? No, there's lots of pawn grubbers in the world. They'll never die. We'll never run out of pawn grubbers. Oh, I haven't heard that one, but that's really cool, Almany. Instead of asking what you want from the position, ask the position what it wants from you. Mr. Rook can be pretty grumpy. That rook on d1 had reason to be grumpy this game. All right, rook f8, defending back rank mates for the moment. What might white do here? Take on d6? Maybe? Rook e7, looking to trade some of these rooks. Yeah, if John F. Kennedy played chess. Ask not what you want from the position. Ask what your position wants of you. That's a good concept, actually. Honestly, it's funny, but it's a good concept. Richie sees a trick. You see that we could play knight f4, right? And if rook takes, queen takes, rook takes here. Totally possible. But I was thinking knight f4 kind of improves black's rooks and increases the chances that Johan hangs f2. So if I wanted a pawn here, I would not worry about taking the f-pawn as soon as possible, and I would go for rook d6 or rook e7. Or even just d takes c6. You know, I don't know where did I come up with that move that I've been wanting to play for 500 moves. Yeah, I know. With knight f4, you could maybe play for queen h4, knight g6. There's some possibilities, but overall, it's a mediocre instinct because you're really exposing yourself. And that pawn on f4 is already kind of dead if you just play a move like rook e7 or rook e8 and trade one of the opponent's rooks. All right, we get here. Threat to g7. g6 comes in. Now knight f4, right? More natural, but is there queen c1? There is. Told you it wouldn't be easy. Exactly, Fearless One. White has checkmate in that particular variation. But now we get a rook endgame. Holy moly. Chases the rook. Will the black rook be less shy about pawns than the white rook has been? Oh yeah, he's not shy at all. He takes two of them. Hum, hum, hum. Amazingly, white can now queen a pawn. D takes c6. They've never played it before. They finally play it. Oh my god! And they play it when it wins the game! King g7. Will they find it? They find it! I told you d takes c6 was a good move, didn't I? Didn't I? I told you d takes c6 would be good. And look, once you play it, you win the game in one move. Almost as good as queen h4. There we go. Oh my god. That was an exciting game. Super instructive. Bravo to Johan and Savage. Well fought on that game. Congrats to Johan on noticing the c7, c8 tactic. That's what finally decided the game, just as black was starting to take over. And yeah, from Savage's perspective, a little bit rough that this rook f4 move wasn't good enough here. Needed to trade on d5 first to take away the dc6 option for white. Takes, and then maybe something like rook a5. And, of course, Savage is the one with chances to win the endgame this way. You know? You were close to having it, Savage. You were close to having it. You spotted queen c1 takes f4 as time got low there. And you did a good job feasting on some of Johan's pawns there with rook f2, rook a2. But just one imprecision, you know. And by the way, Savage, there were like a million moves this game where you should have traded on d5 so that he couldn't take on c6. And a million moves where he should have traded on c6. That was one of the biggest themes of this game. Was actually in the middle game that he should be playing dc6 to open up his rook. And that you should be playing c takes d5 to sort of solidify that structure so it's not dynamic. And that persisted all the way to the end game, where here, if you trade, it's not dynamic, right? There's no pawn breaks or passers, and you can try and slowly mop up. But when you tried to take everything, he's got a tactic, and the pawn goes through. So super good game. And if you care to, you can always check the replay where we analyzed the entire game, actually. Very interesting one. Very happy to have stumbled on that particular game because that was great. I may not have time to do another game. There's 20 some minutes left in the arena, but we're gonna try anyway to grab another game. Maybe just check it out for a moment here. So, whoops. Okay, so I want to see the 13 to 1700 group games currently going on. Let's check out Agento versus NXD1 Plus. I don't think I've ever commented on these players before. Black's got 2 extra pawns in this middle game, and White has 1,000,000 extra minutes. So the question is largely going to be, does knight takes d1 check or plus, right? Does knight takes d1 have what it takes to play really quickly, right? They've played probably pretty well the first 20 moves, but at the cost of 13 minutes. Now, can they clean up, can they mop up a game without choking or time pressure blunders? Because they got to play still the middle game and the end game on just 2 minutes. So that's the question that we'll maybe see the answer to right before we have to close down the show. You know, running these tournaments on the weekends always means my partner is the one that we should thank for having these tournaments with live commentary. And it's also meaning, you know, less fun family activities on the weekend. So I have to be ready to run off quickly sometimes to not prevent them from doing anything. B3, Agento takes on the candidate pass pawn of Black, the strongest point in Black's position, but the queen's undefended, so Black can't trade, and White tries to put this pawn under some pressure. Black responds with queen c6, leaving the knight hanging and threatening a checkmate on h1, and we are battling. So, White, f3, closing that diagonal, but when one diagonal closes, another opens. Isn't that what they say about chess? Or about life? When one diagonal closes, another one opens. Is that always true? It's not always true. There's exceptions. It's one of those things that people say and it sounds super wise, and then you're like, oh yeah, but there are tons of exceptions, you know? For example, this door is open. It's closed. Sometimes you're winning a chess game and then you lose it and then you don't win that tournament. It doesn't mean that you automatically win some other tournament, right? Sometimes it just means you lost a game, you never win a tournament, and you don't become a professional chess player. And that itself, not becoming a professional chess player, does not guarantee that a career has just opened up for you as an aerospace engineer. This is not always the case. We as chess players should know that there are exceptions, right?
I better go. Thanks for the stream. Great as always. Pock Pikachu.
Pikachu. All right, Richie. Good to hear your voice. Thanks for joining us, and have a great, probably evening, probably night. Sleep well, and have a great Sunday. All right. B takes c4, knight takes c4. All right. So I think Agento probably wants to actually trade on c4 just to isolate the pawn and have something to attack. Yeah. But you guys know what I'm talking about, right? There's that famous saying that people say, like, when one door closes, another opens for you. which sometimes goes with the, like, it's all meant to be. If I was supposed to be a professional chess player, I would have won the game, but, the universe or God or destiny wanted me to be a potato farmer. Not 100% true. And similarly, in chess, right? F3, opening this diagonal. Yes, in this case, one diagonal closing meant another one opened, right? Which meant that, for example, black could play queen b6 check, right? And then trade off this pawn if they didn't want an isolated pawn. So sometimes it's true, right? Sometimes one diagonal closes means another opens. But if you imagine, like, a closed position in the center, right? White's got d4, e4. Black's got d6, e5, and c5. And white's got a pawn on c3. And black's got a bishop on b7. Like a Ruy Lopez structure, right? If white plays d5, closing the bishop b7 diagonal, that does not open any other diagonals. In fact, it tends to keep all the diagonals closed, right? Same thing in the King's Indian defense, right? You've got d4, e4. Black's got the pawn on e5 with the bishop on g7 waiting to open up. And when you play d5, it just locks the game. Then the diagonals are closed. Diagonals are closed. So sometimes you just keep everything closed, right? Other times, yeah, one diagonal closes, another opens. Okay. Here we go. Bishop c4 is the choice for Magenta, who's now using a lot of their time trying to figure out how to make this game as difficult as possible on knight takes d1. And I approve. There's some real pressure coming through here from white at the moment. Some chances for white to make black feel their power. e6 is dangly, so black doesn't really want to trade the queen. That'll give back one of the two pawns. And this is costing knight takes d1 plus a little bit of time off the clock. They had 2 minutes when we joined this against Argento's 9.5. So Argento's used a lot more time. Oh, we do get the queen trade. So white can recover at least one pawn here on e6. Should they throw in rook d7 first, trying to get active? My instinct is not. I think they should just grab the pawn while they can, because like rook d7, bishop d5 doesn't super impress me from white's perspective. Still, at best, you're getting one pawn, but you're just wasting time with the rook while black is going to get a rook behind the pass pawn anyway. You're welcome, Pizza Racer. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a voice of reason and tolerance here. It's definitely great to have your perspective about not getting upset about things. Definitely, among other things, a useful thing for us to have here from you. 96. 27 seconds left. Ay, it's getting tight. I agree with the pressure Argento's putting, and the move order with knight e6 was good. Rook here stopping knight c5 and getting behind the pawn makes sense. But now there's the move rook d7, right? And does black have time to defend stuff? Oh, goodness. Maybe black needed to play rook f7, right? To defend the second rank. Because when I look at rook d7 now for white, that feels annoying for black. I think Argento's fully pulled back into the game. Rook d7 played, and now knight takes d1's got 20 seconds to handle basically a position that's anyone's game. It's just whatever will happen will happen. Okay, rook b8. That's a good move. That's a good move. If this rook comes over to c1, we can take on f3 in one fell swoop. Otherwise, we're going to keep pushing this pawn until the rook does come over. So how should white handle it? Argento takes. We get a quick move from knight takes d1. Very good. Now what should white do here? There's a choice between rook g6, decimating the king side, but letting this pawn get really, really scary. Or maybe a move like rook c7, trying to start dealing with this pawn. That's very tricky for white to decide. They go for rook b1. Wow, what a cool move. I didn't see that coming. So the idea is against bishop f3, you can trade one rook and then save this rook to c7 in one go. And you've got that pawn nicely observed. Very good. And if black goes after your knight here while it's defending the rook, you just take on b7 and trade the minor pieces. Nice move from white. c3 from black, ignoring it. Oh no! If we take the bishop on b7, c2 queens. Oh, that completely refutes rook b1. How did knight takes d1 find that in just seconds? They were the one low on time. And they expose a weakness in white's play. Rook b1 was not good. It looked good, but it was not good. This move refutes it. Now white's got to scramble, and that pawn's getting to c2. And bishop f3 is coming. Oh, my goodness. I think white needs to go rook e7 here. It's hard to find, and it looks to me like the only move. The reason is partly because the rook needs to be able to go back to e1 and defend c1 if black goes c2 and rook b1. And if your rook goes to d7, it can't get back like that. So I think in this position, rook d7 loses to c2, rook c1, and then bishop anywhere. But let's say, for example, bishop d5, rook takes d5, rook b1. Queening, right? So we have to go rook e7, c2, rook c1, bishop f3, knight d4, and then on rook b1, we have rook e to e1. Oh, even there, the move bishop d1 might win for black, disrupting the rooks. Yeah, that wins for black still. So there's no saving move for white here after c3. So Tactics and Swindle says bishop d5, one last move, which may likely be the case, but this move wins too. Oh goodness. Does rook c7 give any hope? Rook c7, c2, rook c1. Oh yeah, rook c7 still gives a hope, no? Yeah, rook c7 is still a game, huh? Argento using their time quite well. They did not try to just blitz NXD1 plus off the board. They've been consistently trying to flex the extra time to play good moves, even though this rook b1 might not have been a good move. Just because you're using your time doesn't mean you'll play all good moves, right? But it means you play a fair number of good moves, and Argento has done that. They've played a lot of good moves, and they've used their time pretty well. Rook c1, bishop f3. I think rook c7 is the only hope here as well, and I think this rook c1 move order, bishop d5, would probably win for black, but maybe there was knight c7. So maybe rook c1 was okay too. And they find rook c7, Argento, yes! Now that's some good work. Beautiful. Bishop d5 is the best move here, I think. Only good move. Bishop d5 or g4. But knight takes d1's got 10 seconds to find one of those moves. See, the problem is if you trade on c7 and play rook c8, white just takes on c3, right? Maybe Argento's going to try, maybe knight takes d1's going to try rook b3, huh? But there was this brilliant option of attacking the knight with your bishop, and if white takes on c3, you take the knight and you defend c8, right? But otherwise, if because the knight's attacked, they trade rooks, then you can recapture and you defend your c-pawn from there. But okay, we get rook b3, which was reasonable and not as hard to find as the other. Now black has to choose between, oh my god, anchoring the pawn, brilliant move. Rook takes c2, rook c1, rook b1. Holy moly. The pawn's going to get to c2. White should play knight b4 though, right? Then on c2 you could take it. Oh, and then rook here? No, then we take here. Okay, knight b4 is fine here. Knight b4 is fine. This is very intense. Maybe black should have just taken this pawn. But they went for the kill with 7 seconds left. And Argento needs to find knight b4 or something else of good quality. They take! No! Oh, check. What? I didn't plan on that. But black still has rook b1, c1, right? So this is no different. This is no different. It's just not good enough. Man, oh, it sucks to spend all that time here right at the right moment and still blunder into this. It's too bad. And they were close to pushing knight takes d1 off the clock as well. But now it's a winning endgame for black. If they can play the whole endgame on the increment. Rook versus knight. Because white's going to have to sack the rook for the c-pawn here. Resigns? No, don't resign. You fought so well, Argento. Oh, no. All right, folks, here's what I was envisioning. Maybe I'm missing something, but rook here, attacking the pawn. Check. Here. Here. Take it. Take it. And then bring your knight to the king side. Don't even try and save the a pawn. Just try to get your knight across so it doesn't get cut off on the queen side, right? You know, just coming around. This kind of an endgame can be tricky to play out, right? So definitely with your opponent having like 10 seconds, you want to try and defend this endgame as white. Or you could come here to cover the entry squares along with the pawns, right? You can put up a tough defense here. Very, very hard to win. I mean, I don't know if I could win this with 7 seconds on my clock. As black, I would definitely struggle. You could either blunder a knight fork, but more than that, you could just not find a way to make progress. It can be very, very difficult, this endgame. I've had many versions of this in my life. You know, rook and 2 pawns against knight and 3, rook and 2 against knight and 2. Sometimes the pawns are split, sometimes they're healthy, you know, making it easier or harder for different sides. And on one side of the board, the knight is no joke. It can fight pretty hard against the rook. So this is eminently worth playing out. But that... Oh, is that you, Alfaro? Well, you can rewatch the replay to see what we think. But yes, in my opinion, you should have definitely continued fighting. I would say your opponent's chances of winning this endgame would be about 40 to 50%. I think you've got a 50% or greater chance of holding the draw here. So that's my take. You can go back and see everything I said. You played a great game. Congratulations on that, and thank you for giving the rest of us something fun to watch. Going well, chest in my veins, but it's time for me to take off. So yeah, the arena's ending in about 5 minutes, and I'm going to go do some things with the family. So we're going to send a raid here. Thank you to all our players for giving those of us not playing a fun show to watch with the games. And of course, I hope everybody enjoyed their games. I hope that you got good experience. I hope that your opponents didn't cuss you out. For those of you who may have won a game, I hope that afterwards your opponents just asked you for some advice instead of cussing you out. And I wish you all a great evening or day, etc. And we'll see you around probably tomorrow, being Monday. Should be on streaming at some point for a couple hours when the kids go to summer camp briefly. Let's pick somebody to pass a raid on to. We've got the Chess Heroes. And yeah. Got the Chess Heroes. All right. And you're welcome, Boondock Striker. Thank you for supporting us with those sweet Bezos bucks. For everyone else out there who might unfortunately happen to have Amazon Prime, well, at least if you have it, you might as well send $2 to us. Bezos has enough. And we'll see you again soon. Be well, everybody.